Our theme for this month is wisdom. When you sit down to write a call to worship, you quickly begin to question your capacity for wisdom. We all hope that we can take our experience, knowledge, and judgment and turn it into wisdom. Yet, the development of wisdom requires attention to what is around you and the hard work of attending to what you experience and learn to integrate into your actions in a worthy and just way. Attend to the words of Leslie Takahashi. Walk the maze within your heart. Guide your steps into its questioning curves. This labyrinth is a puzzle leading you deeper into your own truths. Listen in the twists and turns. Listen in the openness within all searching. Listen. A wisdom within you calls to a wisdom beyond you, and in that, the dialogue lies peace. We light our chalice flame with these words. May it light within us hearts of compassion, minds of wisdom, actions of justice, lives of service, and souls of awe and wonder at the beauty of this life, of this world. The first reading is Traffic Misdirection by Pedro Pietre. The greatest living poet in New York City was born in Puerto Rico. His name is Jorge Brandon. He is over 70 years old. He carries his metaphor in brown shopping bags inside the steel shopping cart he travels around with on the streets of Manhattan. He recites his poetry to whoever listens, and when nobody is around, he recites to himself. He speaks the wisdom of unforgettable palm trees, the vocabulary of coconuts that wear overcoats. The traffic lights of his poems function without boring advice from AC or DC. Current bookstores and libraries are deprived of his vibes. To become familiar with this immortal poet, we have to hang out on street corners, building stoops, rooftops, fire escapes, bars, parks, subway train stations, bodegas, botanicas, iglesias, pawn shops, card games, funerals, Valencia Bakery, Hunts Point Palace, pool halls, Orchard Beach, and Cuchifrito stands on the Lower East Side. The admission is free. The presence is poetry. The second reading is an excerpt from Thomas Merton. In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I theirs, and that we could not be alien to one another even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation in a special world. This sense of liberation from an illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. I have the immense joy of being human, a member of a race in which God's self became incarnate, as if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me now that I realize what we all are. Then it was as if I suddenly saw the secret beauty of their hearts, and the depths of their hearts where neither sin nor desire nor self-knowledge can reach, the core of their reality, the person that each one is in God's eyes. If only they could see only if they could all see themselves as they really are. If only we could see each other that way all the time. And if only everybody could realize this, but it cannot be explained. There is no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun.
Thank you, band. So perhaps in the last several weeks or several months, you've seen this image of a teeter-totter that stretches on either side of the border wall between the United States and Mexico. It's an image that is true as an artist put in this sculpture, but also this living sculpture. The image of children playing, unable to see each other, separated by fear and politics and nationalism, brought together in this unseen way by play. It's a heart-wrenching and a heart-warming image in one, splitting hatred apart with something hatred was trying to split apart, splitting it with laughter and joy, reminding us of what our cruel world can and has done and is still doing, trying to get in the way of our shared humanity. But life and love seem to have limitless reserves of creativity and possibility and hope, and art and play keep showing up. We live in times where old questions about our humanity, about our ethics, about how we live in community are still alive and well and complicated. We still live in times where the most diverse field of candidates for president, no matter who you may have supported and for whatever reasons, whittles down to the classic vestiges of privilege. And so much of the complexity is about how we balance the individual and community, how we have either a limited or an expansive understanding of identity or representation, or theologically, the question is, how do we define who is we? There is something in liberal theology that, like most things, has beauty and has its downfalls. It's our love of nature coupled with individualism. The beauty of nature is obvious: to revere the natural world and our identity woven into it, to experience the awe and wonder and power and serenity of sunlight and woods, of streams and waters. It is in the teachings of our spiritual forebears, the transcendentalists, but the teachings of many, many others long before them. The natural world is sacred, an expression of the holy, an embodiment of beauty, an invitation toward harmony and balance and perseverance. But at the same time, there can be a downfall in the type of idolatry of the natural world when it's coupled with other cultural tendencies like individualism and privilege. Because when you add those ingredients into the spiritual mixture, it can and has often too quickly led to spiritual isolationism. The idea that spirituality and religion, kind of like the phrase spiritual but not religious, which I know many of us love. It's okay, you can still like that, but just hear me out a little bit. It takes the beauty and the wonder of the natural world and the gifts of personal spiritual practice and can turn them into spiritual individualism, secluding ourselves from the wider world, isolating ourselves from community, or just believing whatever we want as if there's no other collective wisdom to be in conversation with, that we can only find inspiration on our own, often secluded in the woods by ourselves. But for spirituality to have depth, it has to be religious. And by religious, I mean going to the root of the word, religare, which has the same root as the word ligament, which means to bind together. Religion, at its core definition, is about how you are bound and in relationship with community, how your beliefs are in relationship with something and something larger beyond just your own beliefs. To not be isolated or siloed in your spirituality, for your beliefs to be held in a larger context, a larger story, to be in conversation and dialogue, to be in process with your beliefs, an evolution of constant learning and growing your whole life. For our spirituality to not be stagnant or individualized, but to be dynamic, changing, and open by being religious in the best sense of the word. I know it makes some of you cringe. That's okay. Now, what I'm not saying is that it's somehow wrong to have a spiritual practice or a spiritual life that is rooted in the natural world. Of course, that's not wrong. Or that it's somehow wrong to find your core inspiration in solitude, in a forest, or by the water. That's not wrong whatsoever. If anything, we need more and more people who revere the natural world as sacred and to enact policies and procedures that are rooted in sustainability and environmental practice, to believe in science, which doesn't seem to be cool these days in the wider culture, to not be disconnected from the world. As long as we don't fall down a slippery slope into some type of fundamentalism that believes the only place you can find wisdom is within yourself alone, or the only place you can experience the sacred is out disconnected from your community in the woods by yourself. There has to be some place to hold the complexity there. Like in these words from William Cullen Bryant, who says, "Not in the solitude alone may we commune with heaven, or see only in the wood or the sunny vale the sacred, or only hear its voice where the winds whisper and the waves rejoice. But even here do I behold the steps of the Almighty, here amidst the crowd, here in the midst of the city, with everlasting murmur, amongst the proud piles and the work of humankind." There is beauty in and amongst the natural world, of course. But there is also beauty in and amongst the mess of humanity, in the midst of poverty, in the midst of the concrete jungle, downtown, whatever city. There can be beauty and wisdom there too. And when we think about isolation and the privilege and option to isolate ourselves and who can and who can't, it's hard not to think right now about communal health if you read any headlines. Who has the ability to isolate? Who should? Who can't? Because in our histories as a nation, as a religious tradition, there can be found tendencies toward isolation, not only in spirituality, but in physical location and place. And where it gets really complicated and potentially destructive is when those isolations are about how we fear each other, whether that's how we say it or not. Fear of the lack of cleanliness of others, fear of the illness of others, which you can imagine has been used countless ways over the years to separate people and communities from the clean and the unclean. But we also know there's a balance, ways to hold truth of risk and community, ways to care for ourselves and for each other, like giving a wave instead of a handshake sometimes during the year. A few ethicists have recently pointed out this whole global health conversation is reminding us about how we should be taking care of ourselves and each other all the time. Susan Raffo is a writer and community activist, and she recently wrote this. She said, "Whether it's a coronavirus pandemic or climate change or any number of increasing natural and military-based and disease-based disasters, we create the conditions now for the communities we want to live in tomorrow. It is past time," she says, and it is always time to talk about our friends and neighbors and about how we will care for each other, how we will care for climate refugees when they show up at our door. She says, "Now, not later, is the time to identify where we can grow our own food, who has what kind of skills for care and tending, who has extra rooms, who knows how to hotwire a car or make gas out of vegetable oil, who knows what plant medicines can lower a fever. This," she says, "is where we should put our energy or worry or stress about the things we cannot change and the things still unknown that are still emerging." And so she ends it with, "So should we worry about the coronavirus?" She says, "I keep being struck by how the things we should be doing in response to this are really the things we should be living all the time. They're about caring for ourselves and each other, building and supporting ongoing collective strategies of safety, of wellness, rather than staying isolated until and if the shit hits the fan when we have to rely on infrastructures that might not know our names." So why did the soul cross the road is the question. At least that's what's printed in your order of service. Because there are many answers to this, but I think the soul crosses the road when we know that it's beyond ourselves and it's beyond our own isolation, it's beyond individualism and fear and protecting our own as if we don't all belong to each other. It's knowing that on the corner of 4th and Walnut from Thomas Merton, or in the center of the city, just as much on the wooded path around the pond, it is in the bodegas and the botanicas, and it's on the Lower East Side where we find people and this mess of humanity and community shining like the sun. And we realize there is wisdom there. There is beauty and insight and love in the most unexpected places. It's how we pay attention to things beyond our awareness, beyond our own knowledge. As Mark reminded us this morning, to pay attention to the twists and the turns within our own spirit, our own heart, knowing that there's so much more to learn beyond what we thought we were sure of. That there's always more truth, more beauty, more love when we move from the dark side of the street, the shadows of fear and dread and doom, to the bright side of the road, where always that is the place where we find community. So in a time where headlines ask us to self-isolate, which may be good from time to time, I think the larger ethical question, the spiritual question, is how are we caring for each other, always? And how are we caring for the most vulnerable? It starts, I think, by washing our hands, literally and metaphorically. So I leave you with these words from Dory Midnight, a beautiful extended excerpt of her writing, Washing Hands. She says, "We are humans relearning to wash our hands, which is an act of love and care. Wash your hands like you are washing the only teacup left that your great-grandmother carried across the ocean. Like you are washing the hair of a beloved who is dying, like you are washing the feet of Grace Lee Boggs or Beyonce or Jesus or your auntie or Audre Lorde or Mary Oliver. You get the picture." She says, like this water is poured from a jug your best friend just carried for 3 miles from a spring that they had to climb a mountain to reach. Wash your hands and cough into your elbow, they say. Rest more, stay home, drink water, have some soup, they say. It's always true that we should move with care and intention, she writes, asking, do you want to bump elbows instead with everyone we meet? It is already true that people are hoarding the things that the most vulnerable need. It is already time, she says, that we might want to know who in our neighborhood has cancer, who has a new baby, who is old, who has children in another state, who has extra water, and who has a cellar, who knows how to can things, who is a nurse. She said, it is already time that temporarily non-disabled people think about people living with chronic illness and disabled folks, that young people think about old people. She says, science says compassion strengthens the immune system. I want to read that line again. Compassion strengthens the immune system. She says, those of us who have forgotten this and other traditions, instead, we turn to hoarding, hand sanitizer, and masks. We find someone to blame. We think that will help. But do you want to blame something? Blame capitalism, and blame patriarchy, and blame white supremacy. Amen. Yeah, we're getting a little universalist in here. All right. I like that. She says, it is already time to remember to rub salt on your feet, steep your handkerchief in tea, to pray the rosary, to kiss the mezuzah, to cleanse with an egg, because in the middle of the night, when you wake up with terror in your belly, it is time to think about stardust and geological time, redwoods and dance parties. It is time to care for one another, to pray over water, to wash away fear every time you wash your hands. So may the ritual of communal care lead us to find wisdom in the mess of this world and the mess of humanity on the common roads of every day, which are shining like the sun. Amen. I invite you to place a hand on your heart or raise them toward the heavens, or hold hands if you're comfortable with those next to you. And breathe deep the breath of life. Go yonder, and gather the people. Give them not hell, but courage and hope. Give them something of the love you have found here, and tell all the people that love is our home.